Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 533. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes, Allah HaShalom, and in merit of Baruch Ben Yamin Ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukusil Ben Lei Rochel and Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todris Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altes. So we are in the second half of the month of Shevat, coming off of Yud Shevat, 75 years, anniversary of the Rebbe's leadership, following the Hiluli Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, coming from Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Lilones, and in this week we actually entered to another significant day in Shevat, the 22nd of Shevat, Chof Shvat, which will be the 37th Yartzeit Hilula of the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka in the year Tafshin Mem Ches, 1988. And so we'll speak about that, especially in context of the month of Shevat, as the Rebbe explains, we'll discuss, as well as this week is Parsha Mishpatim, which will also be Shabbos and Vorchim Chodesh Adar. So the next month is already upon us. And as we see, time rolls on, time moves on. Time is always moving. But as the Alter Rebbe told us and taught us, we have to live with the Zeit, we have to live with the times, which means to live with the parsha that we read during that time. The Chayenu ve'erich Yemenu is the life, the bloodline, the lifeline of a Jew is the Torah. And when you learn the Torah of that time, you understand the deeper meaning and the significance of the time and its opportunities that it provides us. Because time at the end of the day is energy. And so we live in a world where there's a lot happening. We've been promised that we are on the verge of the Geula, Moshiach's coming. And in many ways, you look at the world today and there's so many advancements that seem to indicate exactly that, as the Rebbe told us, open our eyes. Open your eyes and you'll see, connect the dots, and also both on a technological level, on a political level, and many other things that no one would have expected, especially literally in the last months, with the ascent of a new president in the United States, who's doing things like nobody has ever done. Whether you like him or you don't like him, the bottom line is there's definitely changes happening in the world. And in many ways, you could see them as positive changes, beautiful changes, things that can actually change dramatically, matzav in Eretz Yisrael, the matzav in the world in general, the situation. And it's our job is to utilize all these opportunities for good purposes. And that was always the approach. The approach is to use our freedoms, to use our gifts, our blessings. It's all in order to enhance and to propagate and to perpetuate God's presence and the awareness of God in this world by all human beings. And we have opportunities today in doing this literally unprecedented with, as I said, the advancements in technology, including AI and so many other ways. Just saying that as a general sentiment, and I was just thinking about it today, even though it's really not just timely only this week, but coming from the 75th anniversary of the Rebbe's leadership, these milestones make a difference. The Avodah that a Yid does, the Avodah that we do, does have impact. And it accumulates over the years. So over the thousands of years of the Mesiras Nefesh and dedication and sacrifices and the mitzvos and the commitments and the prices that were paid, it has affected the world. The world has become a different type of reality. So though there's things that definitely can use improvement and there are things that are not positive at all, but there are many, many things, and especially the general trajectory is a positive one. I remember Purim Tov Shemem Zayin at the end of the Fabrengen when the Rebbe was speaking about the good koch that Fabrengen Purim Mem Zayin about the Geula, that otot, and then he said, but then you see in the world things that you never saw before, in a negative way. And the Rebbe made it very clear. That's because Yizbaru v'yislabna advarim. As we get to a point of total redemption, yes, the highest level, so every little thing starts emerging. everything becomes clear, as Daniel says. There's a certain crystal clarity. It's like whenever if you see a white background, very pure background, it's going to point out in a glaring way every blemish, every stain. That's how it is. So the purer you get to a state, the more you see the problems. And seeing the problem is part of the solution. So this is not to dismiss or minimize and many of the confusion or many of the distortions that exist today. It's just to put it into context. And we have to be the wise ones. Meaning when I say we, I'm Chacham v'Novin, a Jew who learns Torah and learns Chassidus and learns the Rebbe's perspective on things. You have to open your eyes and look at the world through that lens, then you see a Ge'uladika reality emerging, new paradigms. Besides simply for the gift that we have of freedom itself, unprecedented freedom that we can sit and learn Torah and teach Torah to our families, to our children, to our communities, not without the fears that once existed of Gzeidus and Shmodis and the Diffus and all the different things that the Jews had to contend with in the worst possible way. That itself is already Messianic. But in addition to that, the ability to spread Torah and Chassidus like we have today, literally in ways that can reach every corner of this earth, immediately, spontaneously, without any hesitation, in a way of Mola Orez Deis Hashem Kamayim Leyom Mechasim, just to name a few things that are very clear that simply didn't exist in the past. So yes, there are many people who are ignorant. There are people who don't know. There's so much lack of clarity in so many areas. But that is what's called mechusa zman or mechusa maisa. It means it's not because they can't be reached. They can be reached, as I said, with technology, with information. So we have to actually do that. So you're not dealing with a force of evil that opposes the very forces of holiness, as the Rebbe explains in a number of places. So just an overall, wasn't something I was planning to discuss, but it's good to put things into context as I said, are in the middle of month of Shevat, Tovshin Pei Hei, the year Tovshin Pei Hei, 75 years from when the Rebbe assumed leadership, and changes have happened, tremendous changes have happened. Is it where we want to be? Of course not. There's still violence, God forbid. There's death, there are hostages, there's wars to be fought, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you look at it, the pieces are in place. I mean, who would have believed that a president of a country like the United States, the most powerful country on earth, gets up and says things that are not just pro-Israel, are much more stronger than any Israeli leader has ever said. And the question is whether we're living up to it and are we using all the opportunities. That's part of the discussion, which of course is critical, that we don't have a gullus mentality. But we are definitely living in times that if we do what we have to do, we can literally see the fulfillment of the Rebbe's promises. Now, why it didn't happen till now, I cannot answer that question. I'm not looking to answer that question. We have to always keep thinking in terms of what more can we do? Where are we at? And yesterday is yesterday, today is today. New day, new beginning, new opportunities, new possibilities. So this is an overall statement, which of course comes from a very positive approach, something we learned from the Rebbe. We learned how the world, which is a godly world, a garden, even though, yes, at times it behaves like a jungle, but inherently it's a good world, Tev Ma'id and Tev, that God created, and it's our job is to reveal that goodness. And we reveal it by seeing the goodness within ourselves, within others, within the world around us, and actualizing it. And obviously, where you have to fight a battle, we have to deal with something that is a negative, you have to deal with it. But that's not the focus of our work. The focus of our work is Paula Yamamanan, to bring light, to be day workers that bring light into this world. So let's begin with Chof Shevat. Good place to begin. It's later this week, but nevertheless it's this week. And so we know Chof Shevat, as I said, 37 years ago, was the Stalkus of the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, which had a deep impact on the Rebbe, Poshet Begashmis and Das Tachten, as we saw, both right immediately and of course over time. The Rebbe moved this whole operation after Shiva into his house. Shiva for sure, the Rebbe sat in his house, davened every day at the Omid 3 times a day. The Farbrengens changed. The Maimorim stopped, the Rashi Sichos, the Rambam Sichos, the Pirkei Avos, the Zohar. I mean, so many things that the Rebbe himself instituted. There were many, many shifts and changes. But we also have from the Rebbe some clarity about what Chof Shvat represents. On Tavshin Nun Beis, the Rebbe actually gave out a kuntras, B'cho Yevarech Yisrael, gave out a kuntras, which includes some of the sichos of Chof Shvat, and including, I believe, $5, together with the kuntras. And in it, you find the sichos, you find the significance. The Rebbe also spoke that year, Chof Shvat. And just to sum up a bit, to understand a bit the significance of it, let's just put it this way. The Rebbe begins, B'cho Yevarech Yisrael, B'cho is Chof Beis, that B'cho is the Chof Beis Eisis Atera, Yevarech Yisrael, that today is the day, the Rebbe said, Chof Shvat, is a Yom special day, a day that blesses, through which is blessed, and blesses every one of us, in all matters that start from Aleph to Tov, which is Chof Beis Eisis Atera, that B'cho represents. And made it very clear that the Rebbetzin represents that. And though the Rebbetzin was very low-key, and we'll talk about that shortly, but nevertheless, the Rebbetzin was Melech Matronissa, a king and a queen, the Rebbe's queen. The Rebbe said, by the 25th anniversary of Yudalit Kislev was Tavshin Yudalit, was the 25th anniversary. And the Rebbe said then, because the Rebbe they were married to Tafresh Peites, so Peites, so on Tavshin Yudalad, the Rebbe said, this is the day that bound me to you and you to me. Meaning his marriage to the Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka is the day that connected him to the Chassidim. The simple reason, because he married the daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which in turn put the Rebbe in the position to be the Mamala Mokim, that would fill the shoes, would be the successor of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And also in the month of Shevat, Yud Shvat, and then Yud Aleph Shvat. And the Rebbe went on to explain in the Sikha the significance of the number 22. 22 is twice 11. 11 is Yud Aleph Shvat, connected also to Yud Aleph Nisan, the beer of what is 10, what is 11, what is twice 11. So very clearly that the Rebbe in that Sikha explains how the Rebbetzin plays a tremendous role in the whole picture. Whether it was something that was obvious and boilet to everyone, doesn't matter, but behind the scenes there was no question that Rebbe and the Rebbetzin are one. And especially if you learn Chassidus, Zohar and Malchus, as I said, Melech HaMatronissa, this is the significance, even in Elikus, you talk about Kutsha Brichu V'Shchinta, so then also as it comes down into human beings, a Rebbe and his Rebbetzin have that aspect, that together they complete the whole cycle. And that's why you find that, again, even though it was always discreet and not something that was necessarily always seen in public and so on, but it was always understood that is the way the Eibishter created it. Zocher Nekeva Bara Esam, and that union is what creates the Hamshachas. So a Rebbe together with the Rebbetzin, and that comes together. We see it also by the Tzemach Tzedek. Those same names was a similar idea. And when the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin passed away preceding him, it was also a very deep effect that he had on the Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. So without analyzing the effect and so on, but clearly the Rebbetzin plays a role in our shlichus, in our being Chassidim, being Chassidus as shluchim, shluches, as I said, because of the mere authority, if you wish, the mere power of the Deir Hashvi is the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin together. So it's not a surprise that in Tavshin Mem Ches, when the Rebbetzin passed away, it was quite a shock. And we saw the Rebbe, we saw his emotions, we saw, I don't want to use the word vulnerability, but das Tachten, there was a very deep effect. And I say it in a strong way. I say it out of strength and not out of, God forbid, a weakness, because a Rebbe and a Rebbetzin, as they say, come together. So in that sense, Chof Shvat should play a tremendous role. But above all, it's not so much about Parkinzach in the details exactly with the significance of the day, but it's more understanding that our connection to the Rebbe and the connection to the Rebbetzin on a day like this becomes strengthened, as the Alter Rebbe says in Geras HaKedesh, that the day of the Stalkus and the Yortzeit of a Tzaddik, and same thing with the Tzidkonis, that the entire Avodah of that person is Oila to the highest levels, elevates, and it comes down and is Poel Yeshua's Bekedav Haaretz. It affects salvations and redemptions down in this world. And especially to those that are Hilchim B'Drachav, those that follow the Rebbe's path, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins path, and those that learn his Torah and continue to perpetuate. So essentially it's a day that empowers us. It continues to empower us in especially these last difficult days of Golus. So it's already 30 years since Gimel Tammuz, and now I said 37 years since Chof Shevat. But they continue to empower us. That's what these days are. Because tzaddikim lo yaziv tzei marisam, tzaddikim and tzidkonis, they don't forsake their flock. They continue to be with us. And the more we need strength, the more strength they give us. But it comes with challenges, and that's where we're at. So that's overall just a take on Chof Shvat and its relevance to us. But I want to go into some specific questions that have been asked, which some interesting ones, some sensitive ones. So what lessons do we learn from this day, especially for our times? So overall, as I just said, the lessons we learned, that this is a day where a Rebbetzin, Matran Nisa, together with the Rebbe, is a day where her neshama was Eila L'mayla, but that neshama continues to give strength to us in our avodah. So the first thing is to know that we are not alone, that we are here with the strength of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and they continue to pray for us, and they continue to help us in their own way. And especially in our times, look, in our times, as I mentioned, there's so many unique things happening, many, many blessings in our lives. So we have to remember, B'cha Yevorech Yisrael, that brachas come from somewhere. Never to take for granted our blessings. And as the Rebbe had said a number of times, people asked him for a bracha. The Rebbe said, you can ask the Rebbetzin too. She can also give a bracha. And it was more than once that the Rebbe said something like that. So it's a day of brachas, and a day that we should draw those brachas, and we make a kelev to it by doing our avodah, by doing our work, especially in commitment to the Rebbe's work. So we will never understand or know the extent of the Rebbetzins' support, or the Rebbetzins' partnership to the Rebbe, but there's no doubt it was there. And so we honor that by actions. The actions are dedicated to the work that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzins committed their lives to. The Rebbetzins' Mesiras Nefesh must have been tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, because the Rebbe now became a Rebbe, became a public figure. And the Rebbetzin, as I said, behind the scenes was there. So the on one hand, the Mesiras Nefesh, on the other hand, the tremendous nachas. I think the Rebbetzin once said that all the Chassidim are our children. Talmidim ela habonim, shunantim levanecha ela talmidim. Students are children. And who are we as students of? We're students of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. So, though physically, biologically, yes, they didn't have physical children, but we are all their children. And as children, mazari b'chaim, afu b'chaim, when we act in a way that lives up to the legacy and to the spirit of what we were taught and what we witnessed, and we live up to the role models that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin said, that is ultimately the best way to honor Chof Shvat. So whatever it is that we're doing in our lives, everyone has their particular shlichus. It's a day that we strengthen ourselves, and we get more strength from B'cha Yevorech Yisrael. Okay. Someone asked a question. We all know that we don't have many stories of the Rebbetzin, because as I said before, she was discreet and very private. So someone asked a question about stories in general. How do we know what stories to believe about the Rebbetzin? Well, that question you can ask about the Rebbe too. You could ask about anything. As a writer myself and as a speaker, sharing stories, I'm very careful. You always want to verify a story. Some stories are really beautiful, powerful stories, but you want to make sure, especially if you share it in public, that it's well sourced. So over the years, I personally have developed my own criteria, how you determine that. I actually even helped Rabbi Telushkin, Joseph Telushkin, when he wrote the book of Rebbe, And he was asking me, how do you make sure which story? So I wrote up a whole page of criteria. Obviously, a story that's documented in the sense it was seen in public by many people happening, a video, or a letter from the Rebbe, which is black and white, a letter that you see clearly the story. So that itself is the best verification. But then there's stories that are second person or third person, sometimes a rumor, sometimes a fantastic story. So based also on the story itself, the crazier, so to speak, the story, and I don't want to use the word crazy, maybe it's not the right word, but I mean crazy, I meant to say the more fantastic it is, the more you need to verify it. And verification can come either from someone that witnessed it, who's a becheskes kashrus, that you can trust, or more than one person witnessed it. And I'm not going to go through the whole verification process, but there are ways to corroborate a story. There are stories that I've heard, I've sometimes repeated, that I could not really fully corroborate. And I take my cue from the Rebbe. The Rebbe, when he would tell a story, often he would say, I didn't hear the story from my father-in-law. It appears like a true story, which means either because the Rebbe said, Chassidim tell the story, or the Rebbe heard it from people he could rely on. But just to be accurate, just to say, when you heard it straight from the Rebbe, then there's nothing to talk about, for sure. So this is not meant to throw cold water on any story, it's just meant to be honest, because I find, since we're already on the topic, that when you share stories and they're not verified, and then you discover that it has a dubious source or never really happened or happened differently, then it throws aspersions on all stories. So it's a matter of credibility. Matter of credibility that when you tell a story, make sure you have good sources. And if you don't say here's what I heard. I can't verify it, but this is what they say. So that's how I would approach it. And I know some people say, hey, it doesn't matter whether it happened, it's still an inspiring story. But a story has to be emes. You're not talking about just a parable. You're not talking about a moral. Yes, you could always learn lessons from fairy tales too, the havdil. But the point being is that you want a story, especially if you're saying it with a name, you want it to be verified as much as possible. Now, of course, it gets more questionable when you hear it from different people. You say, can you rely on this one? Someone says you can rely on this person, but you can't rely on that one. So there, I'm not going to now start marking who you could rely on. This is what each one of us has to do our own research. And you have to come down. There are people who are trustworthy. They were trustworthy either because they were proven to be trustworthy or they were trusted by the Rebbe, and so on. So you have to also take all that into account. Now specifically, someone writes about one story. There's a story that it was the Rebbetz's private and passionate speech to the Rebbe that if he didn't take over the leadership, we're talking now Tafshin Yud, 1950, that the Rebbetzins impassioned speech, that if he didn't take over the leadership, that all her father's work was in vain, and that convinced the Rebbe to accept the leadership. If this conversation between them was behind closed doors in private, how do we know about it? Unless either one of them, the Rebbe, the Rebbetzin, told the story publicly. Do we have a source or a record of them telling the story? So, very good question. I've had this question myself. We all heard this, that when the Rebbe, people were encouraging the Rebbe to become Rebbe, and people say one of the things was, the final thing was that the Rebbetzin said that we're talking about continuing the work of my father, of Chassidus. Now, does it make sense, the story? Yes. Did it actually happen? I wasn't there. And indeed, how would we know? Unless somebody, would the Rebbetzin have told somebody? Would the Rebbe have told somebody? Doesn't seem so likely, because it was more a closed-door thing, as the person writes. But you never know. Maybe there was someone there. Or maybe somebody understood from the conversation that they had a conversation and it had an impact. So, but the problem is, because I didn't hear it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So my approach to it, and I'll just speak from my own end, I have no reason to assume it didn't happen. It's not like a crazy story in a sense where it's like wild and like someone will say, I saw the Rebbe flying at night in the sky. I'm just giving a crazy example, of course. and I don't even want to use the word crazy, but you know what I mean by crazy. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way. It just means something that is like outlandish. So that makes sense. Secondly, I go a little with the approach that Rebbe Rashab said he didn't like when people said Pshat and Tanya. But he said if it adds a Yerushalayim, he doesn't mind. So if the story does inspire someone, and it adds in Yerushalayim, and it adds in your Torah mitzvos, and your chassidus, and your behavior, so that doesn't mean the story happened. It just means at least the lesson learned from it was a positive one, was a productive one. So I can't go beyond that because, again, I don't know how to verify such a story. And if anybody has more information that I'm lacking, by all means. I've never heard who the source was. Who did we actually hear it from? But that's an example. Now, there are stories that I personally heard from a Baldover, from someone that it happened with. I've heard a story where the Rebbetzin spoke to someone in her house and she shared things. There were people who would visit her. So we do have stories like that. And again, if the story is something that it makes sense, the more fantastic it is, you probably want to verify it more. Simply, again, because of the nature of the story. Okay. If the Rebbetzin wanted her privacy, why are we speaking about her so publicly? We know the Rebbetzin made it clear, someone writes, that she wanted to be out of the spotlight and keep a very quiet and private life. So if we tell stories about the Rebbetzin, are we violating her privacy? So even this, the statement you said, we know that the Rebbetzin made it clear she wanted to be out of the spotlight. Did she announce that? Or it was her behavior? We knew she was discreet. We knew she wasn't make public appearances. We know she kept a low profile, etc. So even that is also partially, I would say, speculation. We know she did not play a public role. I understand that. That's not what I'm challenging. I'm just saying, do we really know what she said, what she felt, what her intentions were? So my approach to this, and I'm just speaking how I see it, that some things are off limits in a way. It's her private business. The Rebbetzin wanted to be a pair and wanted to be involved in something. She knew how to do that. And there were times she did certain things. And if she didn't, that's her business. I don't analyze it. It's not my business. I don't know the cheshbonus. These are people of a different caliber altogether. And about the Rebbe, we do know. Yes, the Rebbe was obviously more public. He made public appearances, farbrengens, yechidus, later dollars, etc., etc. But how private was the Rebbe? The Rebbe was extremely private. I can speak for someone who worked for the Rebbe. I think the Rebbe's privacy was even deeper than we would even imagine. Just because the Rebbe on one hand was so public, it doesn't mean he wasn't private. There's so many areas. So this goes down to areas, it's not our business. Our business is to be chassidim, to be shluchis, to fulfill what we're told. Yeah, of course there's a curiosity. We all have a certain, I guess, voyeuristic curiosity to know what's going on behind the scenes. And it's geschmack to hear a story where the Rebbetzin called late at night and the Rebbe would have the secretary call her that the Rebbe's coming home late, the care they had for each other. I'm not in any way minimizing that. You love a Rebbe, you love the Rebbetzin, you want to hear stories. But you have to also remember there's some things that certain areas that we weren't told for a reason. And it's perfectly fine. Not everything has to be told. And what's going on in the king and queen's home and their privacy is their business. And I'm not saying this, again, to criticize anyone who's going there, just to keep a certain balance and so on. So, now, talking about her, it's an interesting question. I've had this struggle myself. I personally, obviously, it comes from Shevat, you farbreng, you talk about stories, you share a story that you know. I mean, we know stories that the Rebbetzin herself told people. I heard quite a few stories from my father, from others that happened with them. So, that if she told a story to someone, so yes, that doesn't intrude on her privacy because you tell a story. It doesn't mean you suddenly know everything about the Rebbetzin. But overall, to be mahadir in this, no, I don't think we need to be. The Rebbe did speak about the Rebbetzin, not before Chof Shevat. I mean, he mentioned, of course, and mentioned in the court case her statement. We know her statement had such an impact on the case of Hey Tevis. But generally, the Rebbe did not speak about the Rebbetzin. I mean, there are stories about Be'er Miriam of Motzei Shabbos. I mean, you have a few stories about the Rebbe speaking about his Rebbetzin. After Chof Shevat, we do have these sichos. Some of them I mentioned already. So that again, citing that, the Rebbe himself is speaking publicly, and lessons from her name, Chaya Mushka, the gematria of her name, Ace, 470. And other things that the Rebbe spoke about the Rebbetzin. So that the Rebbe himself is giving us directives. But to be mahader beyond that, to go beyond that, I would tend to say that we have to respect the Rebbetzin privacy, and it's not our business to begin pouring and trying to figure out like detectives and investigate their whole life. And so, for example, if somebody wanted to write a book on the Rebbetzin, I probably would not want to be involved in that project. Not because simply out of respect, because I don't know if she would have wanted a book about her. And would the Rebbe have agreed? Now, I know there are biographies, there are things that have been written up, and again, I'm not saying this is a black and white opinion, but I think respect of the Rebbetzins internal life is something that we definitely have to keep in mind. I think maybe she can make us on Chof Shevat if I bring about the Rebbetzin, especially if you take lessons in our life from her life, then in a way, okay, at least you learn the lesson from it. But if it's just to tell stories and so on, you have to also have that balance. So, and of course, I'm happy to hear people's counter arguments. I'm sure there are going to be many thoughts on this, but this is the take I have on it. Okay. Is there significance to the number 22 in connection with the Rebbetzin? So I already touched on that, and the answer is yes. In the Sicha Chof Shevat Tavshin Beis, the Rebbe spoke about number 22. Firstly, the Chof Asius, but he also spoke number 22 as being twice 11, which number one is the Rebbe's birthday is 11, and also 11 is Yud Aleph Shvat, which is the day after Yud Shvat, and 11 is also the 11th month is Shvat itself is the 11th month, with Adar being the 12th month. And as the Rebbe explains, Yud Aleph represents a level that's higher than Seder Ishtalshlus. Yud is the complete number, the complete cycle. Yud Aleph is already a makif, like that goes above that. Like bli gvul, outside of the gvul of 10. And the Rebbe explains there that the different kufas, Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud, leads to Yud Aleph Shvat, Tavshin Yud Aleph. And the connection to that demonstrates another stage in Gilui Elokus. So there's the Gilui Elokus, let's say, of Mamala Kalalmin, you can say 10. Then there's the Gilui of Sevav Kalalmin, which is the 11th. And Chof Shvat represents twice 11, as the Rebbe explains in that Sikha. So it's like a new Tkufa that began. These are all Tkufas, and essentially in the Gilui of the Deit Shishi and then Deit Shvi. Frierdiker Rebbe was very much connected to Yud. Besides, I said Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud, also the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe is Rosh HaTevos of his name, Yosef Yitzchak. We know the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, signed the last year before Tavshin Yud. The letter Yud became, in Yitzchak, became larger and larger. Eis Ashuris, like almost a solid letter. And the different explanations the Rebbe speaks in Tavshin Nun about a Yud. And Yud Aleph represents a level beyond that. A level that you be mamshech elikus, that's higher than existence into existence. And the Rebbe connects that to the Rebbetzin. So that's one thing that you can look up. And that leads us to the next question. Why is the Rebbetzin named Chaya Mushka? So, someone else asked, do we know why the Rebbe Rashab instructed that his granddaughter should be named Chaya Mushka? So it was an instruction from the Rebbe Rashab. Second granddaughter, should be Chaya Mushka, named after the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin, basically her great-grandmother. So the Tzemach Tzedek, same name as the Rebbe named after the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin, the Rebbetzin, Chaya Mushka, is named after her. I didn't do research where the name of the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin came from. That be interesting, but that we know. So as far as the name itself, so the Rebbe did speak about it, both in Tov Shinun and Tov Shinun Beis, where the Rebbe speaks about Chaya Mushka. Interesting, just to sum up briefly, the Chaya refers to life, vitality, Chayas. Mushka comes from the word muscat, from musk, a perfume, a beautiful aroma. And the Rebbe explains that that's the role that was the role of the Rebbetzin, and the role of general of the Neshei B'nai Yisrael. Because the kavanah is to make a dira b'tachtenim. A dira b'tachtenim, to make a home in this world for God. In making a dira, there are two aspects. One is to make a place where a livable place, a civilized place, that you can that you can live in. Think of it like a shelter. You have a roof on top of you, but it doesn't yet tell us whether it's a beautiful home. Then there's a dira na, a beautiful home. The Gemara says, dira na marchiva daita shalodam. A beautiful home expands the mind of a person. What's a beautiful home? Not just the minimum to live there, a dira, but a dira that's beautiful, which means it has chayas, vitality, chaya, and mushka has a beautiful scent. Not just physically, but also the spirit, the vibe is one that is beautiful. And that's what a woman contributes to the dira b'tachtenim. The Rebbe goes on to explain how this is the role of women in general. So it's a beautiful way of explaining, and it's interesting because in many ways very revealing. Because again, we didn't know about the privacy of what the Rebbetzin did at home and how she built the home and so on. I'm sure it was all beautiful in the most beautiful way, but the Rebbe acknowledged it in that sense and said it's actually her name. He goes on to talk about the musk scent, which is one of the Yud Aleph Samamoni Hakteris, one of the spices in the Beis Hamikdash, one that was actually transformed from something that was a negative. So it also includes this hapcha, transformation. You can look it up, both the Sikh and Tov Shinun, Chof Shevat, and Tov Shinun Beis, where the Rebbe speaks about it. So there you have more lessons that we can derive. And finally, someone wrote the following question. Another story. There's a story that when the Rebbe and Rebbetzin were still in Europe, just as the war broke out, the Rebbetzin saw someone walking that didn't realize he was about to step in an unexploded bomb. And she ran and pushed him on the ground to stop him and save his life. But many years later, the Rebbetzin said, I saved his life, but I still need to do teshuva for pushing another Jew. If the Rebbetzin felt bad and wanted to do teshuva for pushing someone during an emergency act to save their life, would it be fair to say people in 770 and generally need to do teshuva for pushing and shoving, which wasn't done to save lives, but rather just to push closer to the front row to get a better seat? Okay. Well, listen. Let's start with the actual story. So again, is this story verifiable? I've heard the story. I don't know. Again, beautiful story. I have no reason to doubt it, but I don't know the verification of it. Did the Rebbetzin tell it to someone? Also, the story adds this whole dimension. Did she really feel to push him? I mean, she saved his life. What should she have done? Is it an extra sensitivity? That bottom line, a Jew was pushed. I mean, again, the story has many dimensions to it. But before it's starting to be medayik and starting to dig deeper in lessons in the story and all the details, I would want to verify it. Because if the story didn't happen exactly that way, what's the point? Again, I'm not trying to throw any cold water on the story. So it's an interesting story, but that's my comments on it. What I will share is a story I myself did hear from Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yosef Tevel, when he was a young boy. So he was once in 770, near 770. It was the summer, and his family stayed in New York during the summer. The Rebbetzin pulled up, and she had gone shopping for her mother, who lived on the second floor in 770, the Rebbetzin of Chamadin. And she came out, shopping bags. So all the bachrim, of course, dispersed and ran, but he was a bacher. He was not a bacher. He was maybe 7 years old, and went over to the Rebbetzin and offered to help her carry the bags. And she gave him a bag to carry. They walked up the steps to the elevator, and she was going to go up to the second floor. As they're walking, she notices he has a cast. He broke his arm, and he had this white cast. And so she realized, she said, you don't have to bother. But he insisted, so he went up with her in the elevator to the second floor. She thanked him, and she said, wait here for a moment. She walked inside the apartment, took the bags in, then she came back a moment later with a big, big chocolate. You know those chocolates like for Shalach Monas, like coin chocolates that come in a big roll, coins. And she gives it to him. He had chutzpah, the way he described it to me, and he says to the Rebbetzin in Yiddish, Efsher weiss the Rebbetzin, as ich komme von a chassidische Stub, chassidische Mishpache. The Rebbetzin may not know that I come from a Hasidic home, Hasidic family, and nun sind wir aufgehört, and they taught us that when you do a favor, a metuta teva for Eden, or befrat for the Rebbetzin, you do a favor for a Jew, especially for the Rebbetzin, nehmt nicht kenopzo. You don't take payment for it. Meaning he was like, well, you don't have to give me this chocolate. Okay. The Rebbetzin, he says, gave him a smile from ear to ear. That's exactly how he said it. And she said to him, Dachzach mir, as ich komme von a chassidische Mishpache. I presume, I think I also come from a Hasidic home. Remember, the Rebbetzin is only the wife of a Rebbe, the daughter of a Rebbe, the granddaughter of a Rebbe, the great-granddaughter, all the way to the Alter Rebbe. So she says, I think I also come from a Hasidic home. She said, and they educated us. Abishaz git megit nempman. When you're given something, you take it. Special a good chocolate, and especially a good chocolate. So he took it, of course, and shared it with his friends. But that was the story. It's a beautiful story. There's always deeper meaning, of course. And it reminded me immediately of the Tzemach Tzedek story. The Tzemach Tzedek, of course, was specially groomed and brought up by the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe once wanted to give the Tzemach Tzedek a gift. And he gave him a gift. He said, I want to offer you a certain amount of Torah knowledge. Tzemach Tzedek rejected it. He said, you gaita mitzvos. Torah knowledge you have to earn. You don't get it as a gift. Didn't want it as a gift. He wanted to earn it. Years later, the Tzemach Tzedek said he regretted not taking it. Because Torah is aruchem eretz midah rechavam miniyam. Torah is infinite. So as much as he would have taken, he could have then used his effort to go beyond that. So it could be that Rebetzin's lesson to us is that we're given tremendous gifts in our times. We're given blessings by the Rebbe, by the Rebbetzin. And it's our job is to take them. Don't be bashful. Don't be shy. Don't be humble. These are great gifts that we're given. And that's what a Chassidus Shtub teaches us. Because you're given, you take it and use it well to the fullest, especially on a special day like this. Okay. With that, let us move now to, there's so much more that could be said, and I will use this as an opportunity. MyLife Chassidus Applied is already going now. We're in the 12th year. So every year, of course, there's a Chof Beis episode. That I've just talked about Chof Beis already now 12 times. As we do every week, the timely matters. So you can check out chassidusapplied.com if you want more material. Plenty of material on Chof Beis and hopefully every year we try to add another point, another emphasis. Okay. So with this, let's go to the parsha. So this week is Parsha Mishpatim. Now remember, Parsha Mishpatim was first Chof Beis Tavshin Mem Ches. The Rebbe was sitting Shiva for the Rebbetzin, and we didn't know what would be that Shabbos. It was Shabbos Parsha Mishpatim. So initially, there was not going to be a Fabrengen. The Rebbe was home and was staying home. But then, I think Thursday or maybe Friday, the news came that the Rebbe is coming for Shabbos. There's going to be a Fabrengen. And the Rebbe was a Parsha Mishpatim Fabrengen. I had the schus to write up this Fabrengen. In it, the Rebbe speaks the connection Mishpatim to Chof Beis, because Zohar, Mishpatim means laws. the Zohar, interestingly, Pnimis HaTeira, talks about the laws, the guidelines of Eila Mishpatim, of Gilgulim, of reincarnations of souls. So essentially a big part of the Zohar of this week's parsha talks about souls and their migration and transmigration and their journey, which is so fitting to Chof Shevat. And the Rebbe spoke about that. I just found that to be very, very interesting. And the Sikh is printed in Sefer HaSichos Tavshim Memches, Shportim. And of course he spoke about V'achayit Nalibe, which is also the name Chaya. I should also add, just for the record, when the Rebbe came back from the Levaya, so he spoke a few words in the house. And I remember, didn't know whether we should present it to the Rebbe for editing or not. The Rebbe was sitting Shiva. So I decided, you know what, I'll type it up. And to make it easier, I usually would type it was 2 pages. With footnotes, we prepared it. But I didn't want to be material the Rebbe, so I made it back-to-back page. That way you can Rebbe have 1 page. If he wants to look at it, he can look at it. And I gave it to Rabbi Groner, and he brought it to the Rebbe. Maybe a half hour later, he calls me. The Rebbe edited it. I remember running to the house. Yeah, the Rebbe edited it. And initially, when the Rebbe looked at the first page, it didn't know whether there's another page. So the Rebbe wrote, Kemeduma, I think I spoke also about Avos Yisrael and the connection to Nichum Avelim. But then the Rebbe saw that it was on the back page, so he crossed out what he written. And he edited it. Just to add a little more chvivusa de milsa, I guess, around Chof Shevat. And there the Rebbe concludes and says that, yes, Nichum Avelim is a mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, and especially for a person who was named Chaya, means she gave life. So it's like when you menachem ovel, it's an element of giving life. Okay. So Parsha Mishpatim has that connection from Tavshim Memches. But what is the central theme of this Torah chapter? So B'chlal, the Eila Mishpatim, Asher Sam Moshe, that the Eibus is saying, Asher Tosim Lefnechem, that Moshe should present them b'Shulchan Aruch, Ve'eila Mishpatim, Meisif Ala Rishenim. That Mishpatim is referring to the laws that are the rational laws, Chukim Edus Mishpatim, that they too come from Sinai. So the halacha, the Torah that was given, the Mishpat, the dinim that were given by Sinai, continue in Mishpatim. So Chassidus, the Rebbe explains, what's the emphasis? That even the laws that are rational, that make sense, the moral laws, also come from Sinai. Because they're ultimately based on Ratzon Hashem. Like the opposite is also true. Even Chukim have reasons for them. But the truth is all mitzvahs are chukim because they all come from Sinai. Because even logic itself, the Eibishter created. So in other words, there's like 2 stages. There's one is accepting Nasav and Nishma, that God gave us a Torah, and you do it because Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvos v'tzivan, because God commanded us to do it. Ratzon Elyon. But the kavanah is it should come into Apnimis, Mishpatim Asher Tosim Lifneicha. That it should come in a premise that we should integrate it. Later that year, I think it was Sazri Mitzera Memches, that Rebbe spoke in the Pirkei Avos, second Perek, Rebbe Eimer, Ezu Derech Sheyavel Mina Adam. What's the path that a person should choose? So he answers, the Mishnah answers, Teferes Le'esau, this which is beautiful for him and beautiful for those that it's performed for those that do the mitzvahs, and those that see the mitzvahs being done. There's different explanations how that's explained. So the Rebbe asked a Gemara question. What do you mean? Which path a person should choose? The path of Torah and mitzvahs. What do you mean you choose whatever is beautiful? A person chooses? No, a person does what Hashem says. And the Rebbe answered, that's already Perek Aleph in Pirkei Avos. Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. That's the Kabbalah sale. Now the Mishpatim. Now the Torah is saying, now make sure that it's also beautiful in the way that you can relate to. Also in Aprimius and Giluyim, it should be beautiful. And remember the Rebbe saying, Rebbe Eimer, the Rebbe Zokt. Because that's what Rebbe says, Rebbe Eimer. The Rebbe sagt, nicht nur Teire mitzad Kabbalah Sel, the Teire Zalech Durchnehmen should saturate a person and completely be internalized. That you can see a beautiful person living up to what the Teire says. Which you could say is also connected to Chaya Mushka, the beauty, life, vitality of Chaya and the beautiful aroma of Mushka. Okay. What personal and global lessons does it offer for us? Does it offer us for our times? Well, firstly, that as the Rebbe writes and says in many places, Torah is not just a matter of us submitting and surrendering to what God wants us to do. That's the foundation. It's that the Torah becomes one with us. That your mind thinks like God thinks. Your behavior behaves like God behaves. Mahu chanun, afata chanun. As He's kind, you're kind. As He's rachum, compassionate, you're compassionate. So the ultimate goal, dira b'tachtenim, is not just we listening to Torah and not just listening to your Yetzer Hara, chaz v'shalom, but that you become a Torah Yid, that you become a person completely through and through. And Lasadov, when Moshiach comes, that's what will be this story. So Elam Mishpatim is telling us, Shatosim Lifnechem, that Moshe is being told, prepare the Torah in a way like a Shulchan Aruch, like a ready table, that they should be able to integrate it. Something that's relevant, accessible, internalized. So yes, of course we need the Nasa, but the Nasa has to lead to Nishma. It's a tremendous lesson in general, especially in our times. Because often people learn, and they do mitzvahs, but it's mitzvahs anoshim l'moda. It's like mechanical. The goal is it shouldn't be mechanical. It should be your chayis, your vitality, your full passion is invested in it. And it's really what makes the difference. That's what Chassidus came to contribute. So we talk coming from Yutzvat, and the Maimorim Abbas Legani, and Chassidus in general is coming to infuse Yiddishkeit with the neshama, neshmosa daraisa. And this goes back to the point before about dira b'tachteim, not just a dira, a home, but a dira noah, a beautiful home, a passionate home, a dynamic home, an environment where you say, wow, I'd love to be there because it's so exciting. It's making Yiddishkeit exciting, which is so much part of, I'm talking about another story. One of my cousins went to see the Rebbetzin for a bracha. Was it a bracha? No, they went, I think, they came, maybe a delivery, two of my cousins. And the Rebbetzin told them, you have to have fun. Life has to be with fun. Now, of course, she didn't mean frivolous fun. She meant this idea. Yiddishkeit has to be something you enjoy, not just you do as a burden. And enjoyment is reserved for things that are more petty or more frivolous. That it should be done with that full chayis. And one final story I should mention, they say they asked the Rebbetzin, when was the best time in her life? Many people would answer, when I was young, when I saw my father, the Rebbetzin said right now. So of course the Rebbe Rashab teaches about a primi. A primi, what is a dort in Ganzen. Primi doesn't live in yesterday, doesn't live in tomorrow, it lives in the moment. Where you are is the best. You make the best of that, because that's what Hashem is giving you right now. Okay. Since we're on this, we'll talk also a little about Mishpat, Parsha Yisrei. So last week we spoke about Yisrei, and someone asked the question, do we need acknowledgments of world leaders for Moshiach to come? If we say we needed the acknowledgement of Yisrei before being able to receive the Torah, as you discussed last week, and as is taught, we need an axe made from a tree to cut down a tree, could we also say we need the acknowledgement of leaders? This person writes, evil leaders. I'm not sure why dafka evil leaders, but leaders today in order to be able to receive the era of Moshiach. I can't say we need. We do know Avadia says, Dafka Avadia, the Gemara says, Menei Be Abba was a ger who said the great nevuos of the Geula about Edom and being transformed, Hoysel Hashem Mamlucha, etc. But there's no question, as the Alter Rebbe says about Yutas Kislev, that when the ministers and the government leaders saw the miracle, the Eine Kalam, that it was a big thing. And the Rebbe explains because that's the whole point of Geula, should be that the world itself recognizes. So in that sense, yes. And frankly, we do see that. Whether it's Mr. Trump or Mr. Milei in Argentina or other leaders, we see that there's a sense of them recognizing the power of Israel, the power of Jewish people, respecting it. So there's no question that definitely helps in the B'nai Be'abba, in the transformation of the world, when the world itself recognizes that value. Similar to the story of Yisrei. Another question, if mitzvahs after Mattan Torah transform the physical objects, why are we allowed to throw out tzitzis and other materials? Can we ask Rabbi Jacobson a question? If it's true that what Mattan Torah accomplished was the physical items we use for a mitzvah can retain holiness, for example, before Mattan Torah someone could use tefillin and then throw them out in the garbage, but afterwards the items retain kedusha, and we must treat them with the proper respect. Why is this not true for all items used in a mitzvah? We can't disrespectfully discard a Torah, tefillin, or mezuzah, but we're allowed to take an esrog lulav, walls of a sukkah, and throw them in the trash when we are done with them. Why doesn't an esrog, for example, retain holiness after using it for a mitzvah? What's the difference between different items? So, a very good question, which is discussed in Chassidus, namely Torah in Shari Eira from the Mitler Rebbe. The Rebbe brings it in a number of places. So let's start with the Gemara Megillah. The Gemara Megillah, Chavav Amid Beis, talks about this. Difference between Tashmisha Kedusha and Tashmisha Mitzvah. So it says Tashmisha Kedusha, you're not allowed to throw out. That's example Tefillin, Sefer Torah, Mezuzah, and so on. Tashmisha Mitzvah, like Esrig, Lulav, and there's other examples that are brought there, you're allowed to throw out. So the question is, what do you mean? You did a mitzvah with it. So he explains, because the point is that even though Mattan Torah did give us the power to turn everything into a chefetz shel, there's still stages and levels of this. So there are things that are on the highest level of Kedusha, like Kodesh Kadosh. There are things that are lower level of Kedusha. And there are things that retain their mundane personality, because remember, Dira B'tachtenim, you also want to have Divrei Rishus. Not everything becomes a Dover Kodesh. That's not a chsar necessarily, because you want it to be in Tachtenim. So there are things, just like you have, for example, in Yontif. You have Shabbos, Mekacha V'Kaima. You have Yontif is Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azmanim. Then you have Chol HaMoed. So there's levels in Zman itself of the levels of different levels of Kedusha. And then there's Yimei Chayil, weekdays. There's a day like Rosh Chodesh. So Chassidus explains, because the whole point is, you want the diversity of different levels of Kedusha saturating and affecting existence. And same thing is in Mokim, and same thing is in different objects. Another interesting point is interesting ha'ara I would point out, in Sefer HaMamorim Tavshin Tes, page 148, the ha'ara number 4, where the Rebbe talks, a little touches upon this, about little different stages, like even when you put on tefillin. There's the tefillin before you put them on, then when after you put them on, and then what they retain afterwards, that there's levels even in tefillin, or in other mitzvahs that we do. Okay. So let's use the last few minutes of this program. There's a lot of follow-up on the Gaza situation. How should we react to President Trump's Gaza suggestion? Is Israel behaving wisely by not taking President Trump's aggressive approach with Hamas, where the president said that if it was up to him, he would give them a total ultimatum for all the hostages. If not, as he puts it, that all hell will break loose. So a lot of people are talking, so why not take that approach? You have the President of the United States is giving you that suggestion. He stands behind you doing that. And we know what the humiliation, you know what these savages have done and what they are capable of doing. And just dragging this out and so on, in drips and drabs. So it's a different, I always qualify a response like this, that we don't know all the facts. And ostensibly, it seems that's exactly what should be done. But then there are hostages. There are their families. There's that sensitivity. Maybe the goal is to try to get as many as you can and then become more aggressive. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know what they're thinking. But one thing is for sure. I'm taking now the Rebbe's cue, that if it's coming from weakness or from diplomacy, that has no place in the place of military. When it comes to medical matters, you have to ask doctors. So it all has to be because you're dealing with an enemy here, a horrible enemy, and I don't think anyone needs proof of that. We see what they did, and what they have done, and what they continue to do, what they promise they'll do. I don't want to go now into the topic of exchange of hostages. We discussed that last week and previous weeks. But this is something that needs to be looked at very seriously. And perhaps, yes, time for diplomacy is over when you're dealing with such type of behavior. But again, the qualification is, I don't know all the facts. When you don't know all the facts, you want to be wise and say, there are things that you can comment on, there are things that I can't fully comment on without knowing all the details. But there's no question there's Hashgacha Prat is going on, as well as Trump's suggestion with Gaza altogether. No one ever thought of that before. And now it's being taken seriously. And people have to come up with alternatives. But it's definitely taking an approach where we're not going to be just play victims and show weakness, but it's going to come from strength, peace from strength. So in that spirit, someone writes, a few weeks ago, many of us were upset that the hostage deal included Israel freeing terrible terrorists from jail. We questioned why Netanyahu would agree to this, and if this deal is appropriate with Torah, laws and values, and with the Rebbe's teachings. Now, with Trump's new plan to kick all the Gazans out and rebuild it, we can surmise that Trump and Netanyahu discussed weeks ago the plan to once and for all clear out Gaza, and that's probably a factor which led to Netanyahu signing the hostage deal. Now that we see the bigger picture, with the current plan to clean up the mess and bring more safety and security to Israel's southern border be acceptable according to the Rebbe's teachings. So this again requires speculation on many facts that are very hard to comment on. And I don't want to get stuck in that type of place. I think these are valid points. I hope that everything's being looked at very clear-headed, and knowing that Mr. Trump is taking this strong position should put everybody on the defensive, especially our enemies, and hopefully we can clear this up once and for all. It's a big statement, I know, but we definitely have to not back down now. Israel was very aggressive when it came to Hezbollah, when it came to Iran, and that approach has to continue because the war is not over until you eliminate these enemies. Someone else asks, Hi, Rabbi. Last week you spoke about us taking over Gaza and you didn't see anything wrong from the Rebbe's view. I don't understand. If the Rebbe always said not giving land from Eretz Yisrael to Goyim, Gaza is Eretz Yisrael, so how can we give that? How can we give it to the U.S. who are non-Jewish? How can we agree to give Gaza to the USA? So first of all, I don't know if the USA wants to take Gaza. I know Mr. Trump said to own it. But then backpedaled and said, we're not going to pay for it, we're going to get others to pay for it. Sound more like he wants to oversee this process. So I don't see the issue here. This is not about Israel suddenly saying, okay, we're going to secede, we're going to give Gaza to America, and we're going to give the West Bank to someone else. That's not what's happening here. The ultimate goal is obviously to create total peace there. So that's why I don't think we have to go up in arms about that. That's not the issue here. Halavai, this should work out where you can really eliminate all the enemies and create a true, peaceful, sustainable solution. Okay. Is it moral to expel the Palestinians from Gaza? Well, is war moral? Is self-defense moral? Is when you're being attacked and for years, decades, and whatever you try doesn't work. They still continue to attack you. So I think the statement is a very one that's very misleading. Is it moral to take an 18-year-old child, 18-day-old child, I should say, 18-month-old child hostage? What happened on October 7th, is that moral? And how do you react to that? And they're still crying, Achalti v'eichel leid. We're going to do more of that. So I think what Torah demands is we all want peace. But how do you create peace? When you're dealing with people who have only hatred in their hearts, the only way is unconditional surrender. Exactly what happened at the end of World War II. Was that moral? Of course that was moral. That was the only way that brought peace. And today you have Japan and Germany are allies of Israel and of America. Eliminate teaching children hatred. Is that moral? Of course. Teaching children hatred is not moral. So I think if you want to put the question in context, that's how we have to look at it. Now, there's a lot more that could be said, and there's a lot more to talk about, but time is limited. So let me just conclude on a positive note, being that we are going to this week of Chof Shevat, and we know the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, like I said, Lo Yazur Tzei Marisa, shepherd never abandons the flock, God forbid. We continue to get keiches and brachas. Our job is to take them and use them to the fullest and do our work. And yes, Hashem is definitely guiding many things going on in the world today that is setting the stage for, first of all, an Eretz Yisrael that will be completely at peace in a permanent way. And it's just so ready to go into Gula Mitis V'Ashlema, Shlema Sa'aretz, Shlema Sa'Teira, Shlema Sa'am, as the Rebbe says so many times. But we have to do our part, both in our understanding of it, our actions, in Teira Avodim Milos Chasodim, and especially in the spirit of Chof Shevat, in honor of the Rebbetzin. Make a dira b'tachtenim, but a dira no'ah, Chaya Mushka, the most beautiful way, with a spirit, with a vitality, with a dynamic and passionate living Yiddishkeit for ourselves, our children, our families. And from that, light should go out. Beis Vadlech, our homes should be a source of light to everything around us, and have that ripple effect that transforms this world into Adiralei Yisbarach B'Tachtenim, which is Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Be well and kol tuv.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.